Hey there, fellow classic comic collectors. As always, I'm Scott Harris King, and today I've got something a little different. I'm just doing a roundup of some of the comic book news that sort of caught my eye over the last couple of weeks. Um, Almost all of it has to do with vintage classic comics, the kind of comics that you and I like, but also there's some stuff about new comics. Each of these are things that, I wanted to talk about, but I didn't want to do a whole video about each of them or any of them. So I thought I'll just put a video out where I talk about all of them. So a couple of them have to do with CGC. Now, you know that I'm not a big CGC fan. Again, just to reiterate my stance on CGC is I recognize the value in having a trustworthy third-party grading service when you're buying stuff online. But CGC has had so many issues and scandals and all sorts of nonsense over the past couple of years in particular, but really since they started, that I just don't trust them. So I won't be sending any of my comics to CGC anytime soon. If you feel the same way, there's been a big development, and that is that PSA, which is the big grading company for trading cards, has announced that they're going to be starting to grade comic books. Now, over on the CGC forums, there's a lot of skepticism about this, only because every time a competitor to CGC has popped up, it hasn't really turned out to be a real competition. But PSA has a name that's sort of well known and fairly well respected. It's sort of the big name in trading cards, and so they have an established history and established sort of presence and system that is much bigger than, say, some of the other competitors like CBCS that have cropped up over the past few years. So that's something that I think is a really interesting turn of events. We'll see. I don't know when they're going to start. I don't know how it's going to shake out. I don't think they've really announced who's going to be on their team. I think in their press release it said something about them, putting together a team of seasoned, veteran graders and stuff like that. But I don't know who those are. And I think for people that are really on the inside, particularly with the really big books, that's going to matter quite a bit. PSA is also not without their own scandals. I'm not into trading cards, so I couldn't really explain too much about it, but I've read that they've had their own issues, similar to some of the stuff with CGC has had. So it's hard to say whether they're going to end up in the long run being any better than CGC, but I will say that for me, I think that any kind of major competition, real competition for CGC is a good thing. Theoretically, it'll push both companies to do better. I've seen this quite a bit actually in the last year on Kickstarter with the comics that I make. I've been on Kickstarter for 5 years now, and a couple years ago, maybe a year and a half, 2 years ago, all of a sudden, all of these companies announced that they were going to do their own versions of Kickstarter. There's one called Fund My Comic, and there's one called Zoop that does focuses on comics. Backer Kit launched their own crowdfunding platform to directly compete with Kickstarter. And the result has been that Kickstarter has suddenly, after 10 years of everything being the same on the platform, they've massively overhauled their platform with all sorts of new features and bells and whistles and upgrades that people have been asking for a decade. And now that there's serious competition, they have to actually do it. Hopefully that'll be the case here. Hopefully when PSA gets in the business, CGC will have to shape up, and the two of them will sort of push each other to be better. The collecting world being what it is, I'm not optimistic that's what's actually going to happen, but hope springs eternal, so hopefully that'll be the case. In particular, because the other piece of CGC news that came out in the last week or so was there's been this ongoing lawsuit for 8 years between CGC and these dealers. I think they're in Pennsylvania or something. But the long and short of it is that they do a lot of restoration, and apparently I missed this when I was on the forums, but apparently on the forums, the head grader from CGC at the time had posted publicly on the forum some disparaging comments about the quality of their work, and so they sued them, basically saying that it had damaged their reputation and hurt their business because CGC, the big trusted name in grading, had publicly said that their stuff was crap, right? I'm just summarizing from my understanding of the situation. Well, basically, the lawsuit there was finally a verdict rendered after 8 years, and CGC was found guilty and liable, and they were like assessed like 10 million or 8 to 10 million dollars in damages and penalties. Now, I've heard that they're gonna try and dispute it. You know, they're gonna try and bring it back to court to have it overturned or whatever. But it's another sort of embarrassing black eye for CGC. Like, I don't know why you would do that. I've also heard, like, in the threads on the forums where I was reading about this, there were people who had said that they had sent in books that they had bought from these dealers, and that CGC was like coming back with lower grades than they should have, and also like restoration notes on things that were not actually restored. And so there was a feeling among some of the people that were affected by this. They believe that CGC was doing sort of retribution, where they were punishing that dealer by intentionally undergrading and misgrading their books to make them look bad. I don't know if that's true, so I'm not saying that's true because I don't want to get in a liable case either. But there were definitely people that said that, you know, they had sent in a book that they knew wasn't trimmed, and because CGC knew that they had bought it, that it had come from that dealer, they like put a trimmed notation on it, which significantly damaged the value of the book, and et cetera, et cetera. So, and apparently this has happened with multiple people. So I don't know what's going on over there at CGC. Again, this was many years ago. The case has been going for like 8 years. So I think the person that was involved with this, the head grader, I don't think they're with them anymore. CGC, in their defense, tried to claim that he wasn't acting like speaking as a CGC representative, but was speaking like it was just his own personal opinion, which is crazy considering that he did it on the company's website, on the CGC forums. So I don't know. Again, I don't know what's going on over there, but hopefully in a perfect world, the PSA announcement will cause everybody involved to sort of shape up, and we as collectors will finally get the decent service that we should have been getting all along. Speaking of decent service we should have been getting all along, there's been a lot of controversy, a big explosion last week regarding Marvel's decision to add these QR codes. I got in a little bit of an argument with a couple people online. I don't really like arguing online. My gut instinct as soon as I heard this, and so if you're not familiar with it, in the new line of the first issue of the new X books, they had a thing where at the end of the comic, you get to the last page or whatever, and there would be a page that just had a QR code. And if you scan that code, there was a bonus page you would get. And so that you had to read on your phone. So a digital bonus page. And so a lot of people were really upset because, and I should say that this doesn't affect me because I don't buy anything from Marvel anymore, but I was offended by the concept. And basically because the people that buy the month-to-month physical books from the comic stores are the most loyal readers who have been keeping the whole industry afloat for decades. In part because the companies made the stupid decision to only go to the direct market and basically destroy their own reader base. Different video. But the idea that the people who are your most loyal fans and have basically been subsidizing the company for decades by buying the stuff month to month at the stores would be the ones that sort of felt like they were getting incomplete product, because basically you'd need a digital version to read it. And they announced that they would be including those pages in the trade. So if you're waiting for the trade, if you go to the bookstore 6 months later and buy the trade, it would have the pages in it. So the only thing that didn't have the physical page, basically, of course, and if you're reading digitally online anyway, it doesn't matter. But if you buy the individual issue, you basically are getting an incomplete copy. Now, there are people that don't really feel like that's what was happening. They didn't think it was a big deal. Marvel put out a bunch of statements basically saying that anyone that thinks that is an idiot. That's a little strong, but that is kind of the vibe you're getting, particularly like CBR did a really, read to me, a very disingenuous sort of piece where they were basically just railing at the fans for being a bunch of angry fans when clearly Marvel was not putting out incomplete stuff. Marvel, to me, backtracked pretty fast where they're like, oh, actually, it's only going to be in the first issues of these, and actually that it's not the last page that's missing, it's a bonus page, and actually it doesn't actually affect anything, it's just like a teaser for future issues. Now I've read one of them, I haven't read the comics. What I've read from other collectors that have bought all of them and read all these bonus pages is that actually in some of the cases, particularly with Phoenix #1, that bonus page that's supposed to be a teaser for future things was actually really key, because apparently it revealed, and there's no spoilers here because I haven't read it, but it revealed like who the bad guy is, and there was something with the narration or whatever, and they were saying like if you read the bonus page, it completely changes the context of the entire issue and it sets everything up going forward in the future issues, so you actually really need to have that page in order to get the complete story. Marvel basically came out pretty quickly after the backlash and said, oh, well, it's supposed to be a fun bonus for people, but it doesn't really matter because we're only doing it with the first issue of these X books, so we're not going to be really doing it again, and it's not a big deal, you didn't miss anything. But that's not the impression I got from reading the initial comments and announcements about it. It definitely felt like something they were going to be doing regularly. Again, from what I've heard, it was important to some of the stories that you read that page. I just didn't like the whole idea about it, and I still don't. I think that if you're buying the physical individual comic at the comic store, you should be getting the best product. I already hate the trade waiting, and I don't like how things are written for the trade, where you have basically a story that should be told in 3 issues and they inflate it to 6 so that they can put it in a trade collection. I hate that. So they're already sort of like catering to like the wrong audience as far as I'm concerned. But just on the bottom line is, if you buy the individual comic, you should get the whole story. I'm fine with them doing a QR code at the end that has bonus material. Like if you want to click on that QR code and you get all sorts of cool bonus stuff with like concept drawings or, a music video or like whatever. You could have all sorts of things. Maybe the issue you're reading has, Dr. Doom in it, and when you click the QR code at the end, it allows you to, it brings up a digital copy of Fantastic Four #5 so you can read his first appearance or something. Like, I'm fine with that. I think that sounds really cool to get bonus material, but I don't think it should be anything that is from the comic. I don't think it should be pages or even teaser pages or anything like that. If they're going to do a tease, I would rather have that QR code bring you to something like a Marvel Age style, where they have an interview and some concept drawings. I just don't like the idea. Anything that's story content, again, that's going to be included in the trade as story content, it should be in the issue. So that's just my stance. Again, I've heard from other readers who don't think it's a big deal and agree with CBR that it's just a bunch of angry fanboys overreacting to everything. But I felt like, personally, it was a very reasonable reaction to that, even if some of the initial reporting was maybe a little over the top. Finally, speaking of over the top, I've got to talk about Roy Thomas. Now, I should say that I'm a huge fan of Roy Thomas's work. From, his Avengers run is my favorite Avengers run, and Avengers is my favorite superhero book. So the Roy Thomas era, particularly starting for me with issue 51 of Avengers running up to issue 100, that's like as good as like classic superhero comics get. That's the good stuff. I love that run. I've loved it since I was a kid. And he did so much other awesome stuff in the 70s. Obviously, the first 115 issues of Conan. And just so much other stuff, and created all these great characters and did a lot of really great things when he was editor-in-chief. they put out so many cool new books and new concepts and new titles in his brief period as editor-in-chief. So, and that's not even to get into his legacy as a comics historian and fan, because the work he's done on Alter Ego and his other magazines, like, but particularly Alter Ego, with compiling and doing all these interviews with all these great comic creators from the Golden Age and the Silver Age, and now we have this huge library of these interviews that wouldn't exist without Alter Ego, especially now that a lot of those people are gone. Like, it's so important for the hobby what Roy Thomas has done. He's, like, for me, a huge figure in comics history. Having said that, man, I don't know what he's doing. He's just lost it, because if you haven't heard about this, earlier this year, there was an announcement put out that basically Marvel was now acknowledging in their credits, they were changing their credits so that it listed Roy Thomas as one of the creators of Wolverine. And apparently, the controversy about this at the time, besides whether or not he should get any credit, as which I'll get to in a second, as a creator of Wolverine, setting that aside, was that, the reason it matters is because of things like the Deadpool and Wolverine movie, where even though Marvel movies do not pay their creators much at all, they still get a little bit of money from it, right? And so you have people like the Herb Trimpe's widow or whoever, who are getting this money, and now they're getting less. From my understanding, could be wrong, but basically, Roy Thomas is getting a cut now. And so there's a big controversy about that at the time, because basically Roy's role as editor was similar to, or even less than, what Stan Lee was doing. So to hear the story was basically that he decided that he wanted to have a character called Wolverine, and whether or not, like, it was intentionally supposed to be Canadian, I forget the reasons why, whatever. But basically he was like, told them to go do that. And then the creative team actually created the character and did that. And so that's basically what Roy's contention is that he told them to make a character called Wolverine, therefore he created Wolverine. This sounds familiar. It's very similar to the arguments that Stan Lee had made when he was editor. I would say that Stan was probably more hands-on in a lot of those cases than my understanding of Roy's involvement with the creation of Wolverine. But it's weird, because I'd swear that in the past I've heard Roy Thomas basically say, like, that's part of his job as the editor. He's the editor-in-chief. Like, part of his job is to do that. And so to have him now, 50 years later, suddenly claim that he's actually one of the creators of Wolverine, because he did that, is like beyond the pale. Now, I know that Roy is, as a comics historian, and I've read him talk about this before, is very aware of how comic creators in the past have been screwed by the comic companies. So to hear him tell it, it's one of the reasons why he often would take these Golden Age characters and revamp them with new versions or whatever, because he didn't want to create anything new that he wouldn't have the rights to. So he would just take things like Ghost Rider or whatever, and reuse the name, etc. Right? And so he's very aware of how comic creators in the past have been screwed. And if you've read any of his editorial notes and stuff in Alter Ego, it's very apparent that he is very persnickety about making sure that his legacy as a creator is respected. And so he gets very anal about every single detail, and if he thinks he deserves any kind of credit, then he's very sure to point it out in a very annoyingly passive-aggressive fashion. But here's an instance where he's gone way too far, because he's basically like, in an attempt to make sure his legacy isn't diminished, he is diminishing his legacy by being a complete tool, but also he's basically crapping on all the people that actually created the characters, right? He's diminishing everyone, all the other creators. So anyway, that's all the backstory, and the specific thing that I'm responding to is that because of this controversy was reignited when Deadpool and Wolverine came out, because in the credits, sure enough, when they list the creators of Wolverine, they list Roy Thomas as one of them. Now, in the credits, I think he's listed last. I haven't seen the movie yet. By the time this video airs, I think I will have seen it. But I haven't seen it yet, but I've seen a screenshot of it, and I'm pretty sure that his name is listed last in the credits. And so there's a big controversy online with comic fans are like, here's this Roy Thomas being credited in the movie credits as the creator of Wolverine when he didn't actually create Wolverine, right? And so he basically wrote an editorial letter to one of these industry magazines in Hollywood to address this controversy. And the way he decided to address the controversy is to say that actually his name should have been first because he was the most important of the creators. And so he was, and he wrote this smarmy. He has such a smarmy style of writing this stuff, so like weaselly and passive aggressive, where he's basically like, basically saying, oh, you know, if Paul McCartney's okay with coming second in the credits with Lennon and McCartney, I'm okay with coming, you know, later in the credits for the creation of Wolverine. But he was like, I think I should have been first. And it's just reignited this whole thing. I've seen so much vitriol over the last few days of people just dumping on Roy Thomas. And again, as a huge fan of his work, it really makes me sad because he's such an important figure who did so many great things for comics. But it's absolutely bonkers that he would do this. He's basically, again, what I perceive as a misguided attempt to secure his legacy. He is just absolutely setting his legacy on fire. And there's no reason for it. Because A, he had almost nothing to do with the creation of Wolverine. And like B, he has such a huge reputation, and C, the amount of money that you get from it is negligible, so it doesn't, like, that's not really a factor. So I don't know what he was doing, but it's really sad to me to go on, like, online and see all of these comic fans just ripping Roy Thomas, one of the greats. You know, I've definitely seen some people calling him HOUSEROY, and sort of bringing up that, you know, as Stan Lee's prodigy, he is basically, you know, trying to out Stan Lee. You know, ironically for me, someone mentioned, someone was questioning whether he should be listed as a creator of the Vision. Now, to me, I think it's obvious that he should be. But by Roy's own criteria, Stan Lee should actually be listed first in the creation of Vision, because my understanding from what I've read of Roy talking about the creation of the Vision, who's one of my all-time favorite comic characters, is that originally, again, because of these rights issues, he didn't want to create a new Avenger. He wanted a new Avenger on the team, right, because of the way the book was going, but he didn't want to create an all-new character himself because he knew he wouldn't have the rights to it. So what he wanted to do was he wanted to bring back the Golden Age Vision. And so if you're familiar with the Golden Age Vision, you know that he looks almost exactly like the Vision. If you look at the cover of Avenger 57 where he's in the smoke, that's the Vision from the Golden Age, because he used to like appear, he had this, his powers were like smoke based and stuff like that. So like, but when he pitched this idea to Stan Lee said, why don't you make your new character a robot? And so Roy was like, okay, Stan wants me to make a robot. So he basically took the Golden Age Vision and made him a robot. And the result was fantastic. Again, one of my favorite characters, and Roy did so much great stuff with the Vision. So again, for me, Roy's clearly the creator of the Silver Age vision, right? But again, it was Stan Lee that told him to make the character a robot, right? And so by Roy's and to make a new character, right? So Stan was like, I don't want you to bring back the Golden Age vision. I want you to make a new character and make him a robot. So like, you know, by Roy's definition, Stan Lee should be listed first as the co-creator of the vision, which is crazy. So I don't know. The whole thing just is just so disappointing and just makes me just like slap my head. There's just no reason for it. So, what a depressing list of things to talk about. I try and stay as positive as I can on the channel. I like to celebrate comics. So this is a rare instance where everything I'm talking about is just sort of like disappointing. I don't want to say it's gotten me angry. I was frustrated with Marvel's QR code thing, but like just it's also disappointing. So now that I've got that out of my system, let's in the future more videos coming of fun things, upbeat things, back issues, the sort of thing that we all like to celebrate in comics. So let me know what you think about these topics down below, and I'll see you next time.